All right, here we go. This is part 2 of Daniel 5 is what we're looking at. And in Daniel 5:5 from last time, the hand showed up, the hand of God, and the handwriting is on the wall. And in verse 6, it changed everything. Interesting. When the real God shows up. See, parties go on when the gods of gold and silver and bronze and iron, wood and stone. So you can give a party for 1,000 people and do all sorts of debauched things, and they just sit there. They don't care. They don't hold you accountable. They don't care what you do, and they don't act because they're not alive. They don't interact with you. There's no real relationship there. It's just imagined and it's selfish. However, that's what all false religion is. However, when when the one and true God, when the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, when he shows up, it changes everything, and the party stops. And so the king's countenance changed. His thoughts troubled him, so that his legs were weak and his knees knocked. All right, and we're going to start in verse 7. Okay. And here's part 2. So, verse 7, the king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers. And we talked about the astrologers last time in 1 Samuel 15:23, what their witchcraft and astrology and talking to dead people and all that stuff, which you can't really do, by the way. You can't really talk to dead people. It God makes that clear in several places. You might want to look in Luke. Actually, I'll give you the verses. It talks about Jesus spoke of a real situation in Luke, and I'll give you the exact verses just so you know. Let's see, I'm looking for Lazarus and the rich man, right? And so in Luke 15 are several parables, the lost son and the coins, and then it starts in Luke 16. So in Luke 16, it says, he said also to his disciples, Jesus said to his disciples, there was a certain rich man. And if you read through that parable, you will find out. By the way, that's not a parable like it's just a made up story. There's real names and real implications there. It's one of the places where we find out heaven and hell are very real. And one moment after you die is you are where you're attached to the waiting rooms of where you're going to be forever. And they're going to change. Being in the doctor's office, being in the waiting room is still being in the doctor's office. When I go into the doctor's office, there's the waiting room, and then I go back behind the wall. And to the examining room. Well, in both heaven and hell, there's waiting rooms, and heaven, there's an intermediate heaven. To be absent from the body is to be present from the Lord with the Lord, and we go to Him one moment after we die if we belong to Him. But heaven, it says, actually comes out of. It says in Revelation that it comes down out of the heavens, and it's called New Jerusalem. We're actually all going to live in a city called New Jerusalem, and right at the moment, Hades. You ever hear the term Hades? It's not just something the Greeks made up. Hades is a place. It's part of paradise. Well, not part of paradise, but part of what the Jews called Sheol, paradise, that you're going to read in Luke 16 on your own. That's part of that was part of it, paradise. Abraham's bosom, it's called. You'll find out why when you read. Abraham was there, and he was, attached. He was the father of the folks there. The spiritual father, I suppose. He was the one that through him and his line, the Lord blessed everyone that's there. And so, and on the other side, though, across what you'll read about, called the Great Gulf Fixed. The Great Fixed Gulf. It's not movable like God Himself. When He puts something in place, it's not movable. The other side is Hades. And then in Revelation, it says the Lord will throw Hades, everybody that's in Hades, into hell proper, is what in the systematic theology books call it. But hell, the lake of fire and all of that. See, that nobody's actually there yet except a few demons. and they're chained in special places. And so things aren't always, they haven't always been, when you get discouraged, that's one thing to think about, is that things haven't always been this way. Anybody knows that things aren't how they're supposed to be. The world's a rotten place sometimes. It's a beautiful place and a rotten place at the same time. Really bad things can happen, and you can go to the Grand Canyon and look at the night sky and be amazed. And why is that? Sorrow mingled with joy. Why is that? It's kind of like the cross. It's a horrible thing, but there's a beautiful something happening. And it says in Romans 8 that the whole world, Romans 8 and other places, the whole world is groaning under the curse of sin. All of creation, actually, all the way out into the universe, all the stars that you see. But it hasn't always been this way. See, this is not how God created things. In Eden, we introduced sin. And then God's going to fix it all. He redeems it. That's what buying it back means. He buys it. That's why we Christians talk about he purchased redemption with his blood. That's why, because his blood, his life is the only thing that is precious enough to save all of us. And so, boy, I got way out of Daniel there, didn't I? But actually, it's all the same story. So the king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers in verse 7. And again, that takes us back to 1 Samuel 15:23. Notice that that's his first response. Who do I go to? And this is something for you to think about. Who do you go to first? Where do you go to first when you're in trouble? And he went to the astrology page, in the newspaper. That's a bad thing to depend on. It's not going to help you. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers. The king spoke, saying to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple, which is very expensive, and have a chain of gold around his neck, and he shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. The third ruler. And that's interesting. And notice that it's talked about in verse 16 also when we get to that. And this is one of those places I want to stop for just a second. And so we may only get through one verse in this part too. But there's other things. See, it's all connected. And that's what I want to show you as we go through. I mean, you can read on your own, but this is very important. And this is one of the places, see, why is he the third ruler? People will say, the folks that say that Daniel is fiction or is that it was written much later about stuff that there was no way to predict. It's too specific, and you'll find out as we go through that it's so specific. And Belshazzar, this king, he's not even mentioned. It can't be possible. There's lists of kings from the Babylonian Empire. We know about them from very extra biblical sources. The Babylonians wrote things down, and we have them. And Belshazzar's not mentioned. Actually, he is. We'll get to that. But here it says that the third ruler, and we read right over that, but it has something to do. The rulers that were listed, there's actually 3 rulers that are listed in the extra biblical historical records that you can find and look up and all of that stuff. And they don't include the name Belshazzar at all. And people go, well, that must not be, it's not something that matches the Bible. So we know this is true, so the Bible can't be true. See, who do they go to first? They don't trust the Bible and then say, well, we must be missing information. They look at the information and go, well, the Bible must be wrong. And that's a mistake, and it costs people a lot in eternity and on the earth. And so I would urge you not to make that mistake, because the longer time goes, the Bible becomes more reliable, not less. It's proven out, and because we learn more, the stuff that we learn and we dig up changes, but this never changes. It's settled in heaven forever, and the Lord's performing it. It says, and it says he'll be the third ruler in the kingdom. Well, did you know that it says one of the archaeological finds, and I can't remember. I'll look it up in between part 2 and part 3 and tell you in part 3. Okay, but there was an archaeological find that they dug up and they found. And I actually have it written here in my Bible next to verse 16. Now, see, I'm at the age where I need bifocals because I'm doing this. But the name was Nabonidus, probably Nabonidus. But Nabonidus or Nabonidus, whatever, however you want to say it, he doesn't care because he's dead. He doesn't know that I'm mispronouncing it. But Nabonidus is one of the names, one of those 3 names. The last one, if I remember, the Nabonidus that was one of those 3 names after Nebuchadnezzar, the kings. Well, where is his name in the Bible? Who is this Belshazzar? Well, Nabonidus, nobody knows that name unless you're, attached to Babylon and the serious study of Babylon. But Nabonidus, it's Herodotus. Now you may have heard that name. Herodotus was a Greek historian that said that he's the one that we know these 3 names from. And Nabonidus, we found and that's what I'll tell you next time, is the archaeological find that was discovered. It tied Nabonidus to his son Belshazzar, and they found several of these things. And it turns out that Belshazzar seems to be, we know he was in the palace in Babylon, but Herodotus says that Nabonidus, he was an eccentric king, that he was off with his armies a lot. He spent time in other cities, didn't even spend time in Babylon, didn't honor their gods the way that most kings and most people in Babylon did, and he was kind of focused on other gods, and he was a strange guy in terms of the Babylonians. But Herodotus records that he was tied up to Darius the Mede, who is the guy that comes in here at the end. See, Daniel 5 is an account of the last night this is Babylon being overthrown. The king was given a party. The king was giving a party for 1,000 people the night that Babylon fell. And that's what people, that's a picture of, actually, it's not, it would happen really, but Jesus says, and it says in Revelation that when the destruction comes, they're going to be married, giving in marriage, and they're going to be eating and drinking, and it's going to be a surprise. See, I can't believe this is happening. Well, you should have seen it, because why? The handwriting's on the wall. So you should have known this if you had access in it. And people will say, well, the handwriting is on the wall, and it happens, and then within hours it's done. So the Lord didn't give him a lot of time. Well, the Lord gave him all sorts of time, and I'm going to show you where that is here in just a minute too, and maybe in part 3 we'll see how far we get. But the 3rd ruler, this is what I'm talking about, and this is kind of what part 2 has wound up being about. This 3rd ruler in verse 7, and then in verse 16 when we get to that, why would this person be the 3rd ruler? If Belshazzar was the king, why wouldn't he be the 2nd ruler? Why wouldn't he be the one, in charge next? And it was because Belshazzar himself was the 2nd ruler. The archaeological finds that I was talking about, I'll tell you what year they were found in the next time. They were, it says Belshazzar, or it says Nabonidus and his son Belshazzar. And Belshazzar is talked about as like the crown prince, or the prince, or he seems to be the one that was ruling in his father's absence while his father was out. And Herodotus tells us that Nabonidus and his army were kind of bottlenecked in another place, and then Darius marches on the capital. And so that's that wasn't known until fairly recently. The ancients didn't know that. And so if you're focusing on the extra biblical sources, somebody could dig up something tomorrow, and everything that we know changes. That's what that was about. See, now we have new evidence, but it's never going to change what's in here. Nothing has ever been found that changes anything in here. It just gives extra and sheds light on it. Okay, I'm going to stop there and we'll go to part 3. Bye-bye.